December 29th, 1835. The east portico of the United States Capitol is brittle with winter air. Breath ghosts from every mouth. Horse hooves clank on cobblestone, and the smell of coal smoke and horse manure sits low in the bowl of Pennsylvania Avenue. A low, determined drumbeat of carriage wheels and the shuffling of well-heeled boots fills the marble steps. You are there, standing on the cold stone, the Capitol's columns towering like the ribs of some great ship, watching a small group move up those steps with an energy that does not match the slenderness of their numbers. At the center is John Ross, principal chief, in a coat that blends Cherokee craftsmanship with Anglo-American cloth, a soft scarf at his throat, hair pulled back and tied. Neither the theatrical savage some pamphlets print, nor the caricature of feather and paint. He carries in his hand a sheaf of papers, bound and annotated. Inside are petitions, translations, printed resolutions from the Cherokee National Council. Beside him walk Elias Boudinot, editor, diplomat, newspaperman whose steady eyes have read and rewritten the laws of two worlds, and a handful of other headmen and interpreters. They move with the gait of people who have long walked between two sets of rules, and who have learned precisely how to carry themselves where the rules were invented. Inside the rotunda, the Senate chamber smells of candle tallow and ink, of old leather and the iron tang of political anger. Senators in frock coats, starched collars and waistcoats, cluster in small knots, whispering with the comfortable contempt of a society used to owning the stage. A clerk bangs a gavel. Someone mutters a phrase that will make a historian's pen quicken decades later. They call them savages in the corner, the word slipping out like a club. It is meant to wound. It is meant to write an identity on the visitors' backs before they even speak. But the Cherokee delegation is not the pantomime some in the galleries expect. They have spent years bringing their case into the very language of the men who would displace them. Their constitution, crafted in sequence with white American models, is tucked into the same satchel that carries the Cherokee Phoenix, their printed newspaper. The men do not wear war paint. They wear speeches, legal arguments, and a practiced politeness that hides a sharper instrument, knowledge of treaties, of precedents, and of American law. Ross ascends the aisle to take the floor, not in the ceremonial roar of an orator stepping into a coliseum, but precise, measured. He makes no grand show of performance. He places a paper on the clerk's desk, slides off his gloves, and begins. The first sentences are not a plea that leans on emotion alone. They are a catalog, a ledger of obligations, treaty after treaty, promise after promise, written commitments that he reads aloud with the calmness of a man who has memorized the legal scaffolding that should protect his people. He speaks of boundary lines and annuity payments, not as abstract concepts, but as lines on maps and coins that should arrive in families' hands. He references the Constitution not as a hymn, but as a tool, article, clause, precedent, as if reminding the men who authored that document that law was meant to bind even the powerful. Across the chamber, some senators shift uneasily. Here is a spectacle they had been told to expect, the Indian as spectacle. Instead, they face slow, rigorous argumentation that smells of print and study. Elias Boudinot, who knows the presses and has translated sermons and statutes for Cherokee readers, follows Ross. He reads patent citations and treaty clauses with a clarity that strips the language of its assumed hierarchy. When he speaks about property, land held in farms, deeds signed, crops tended, his cadence collapses the idea that Cherokee tenure is primitive and replaces it with the blunt, hard fact of legal ownership. The voices of these men, the way they marshal history and law, make the senator's own argument sound sloppier, like a house whose plaster has cracked under scrutiny. But outside the chamber, on the same day, another event is unfolding that none of the men in the Capitol yet know. In a clearing far to the south, at New Echota, Georgia, a small group of Cherokee men, members of a faction that will be known as the Treaty Party, sit with federal commissioners and signed a document that will soon be fastened to the wheels of government and used to wrench away the eastern Cherokee homeland. The date? The same day. The signatures on that paper will be read in Congress as consent. To the majority of Cherokee people, they are a betrayal. Ross and his party are pleading with the Congress unaware or indifferent that while they argue law in the Capitol, the machinery of removal is already being greased in the fields and cabins of Georgia. Inside, the debate continues. The rhetorical knives sharpen. Men who had expected a performance are forced to listen to clause-level parsing, to the invocation of Supreme Court decisions that weeks earlier had found their way into Cherokee defenses. The irony is a cold, tight thing in the room. The law, the very instrument of expansion, is what the Cherokee now use to defend themselves. The senators' faces, many of them, look as if the ground beneath their feet had shifted.
The gavel slams again, but its crack barely reaches beyond the chamber walls. For while the Cherokee delegation defends their sovereignty in polished language beneath a marble dome, their homeland is being bartered in candlelit corners hundreds of miles away. January 1836. New Echota, Georgia. The frost is still clinging to split-rail fences when the ink dries, thick and black, on a document that will be called the Treaty of New Echota. Only a handful of Cherokee men sit at the table. Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, Elias Boudinot, the same man now speaking in Congress, and a few others of what will later be called the Treaty Party. They are not authorized by the Cherokee National Council. They do not carry the consent of their people. Yet the U.S. commissioners before them, pens gleaming like bayonets, act as if they do. The treaty is written not in the language of justice, but in the language of exchange. Land, millions of acres in Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and North Carolina, traded for territory west of the Mississippi, compensation, and protection. The Ridges sign with stiff, resigned movements. They believe, or convince themselves, that this is the only path left, that removal is inevitable, and bargaining is salvation. They do not know that history will call it betrayal. Wind rakes through the bare trees outside the council house as the seals are pressed onto the parchment. Horses snort in the cold. Somewhere beyond the clearing, farmers are tending to frozen fields, unaware that their barns and wells have just been signed away in a room they were never invited into. But Congress will not care about attendance sheets, only signatures. Back in Washington, word of the treaty arrives like gunpowder tossed into a furnace. John Ross receives the news not as policy, but as a knife between ribs. He reads the document and immediately drafts a protest signed by over 15,000 Cherokee citizens, a staggering number considering the entire population. The protest is not written in the tone of defeat. It burns with legal precision. We are not ignorant. We are not conquered. We did not agree. Ross submits the petition to Congress like a man throwing down a gauntlet. He dares them to pretend they cannot read. Outside the Capitol, carriages rattle over slush as newsboys hawk broadsheets. Some papers call the treaty necessary progress. Others print editorials with headlines like "Fraud in Georgia," "A nation sold without its voice." In taverns and parlors, arguments split along familiar lines: expansion or honor. Some say that Cherokee must go because civilization demands it. Others whisper that America has broken too many promises already. Inside the Senate, something strange begins to happen. Legislators who once spoke of savages now hesitate, aware that the eyes of the press, the churches, and foreign dignitaries are fixed on every word. The Cherokee have turned the legal battlefield into a moral one, and morality, unlike law, is harder to ignore. Ross returns to the floor, not as a supplicant, but as a prosecutor. He reads aloud the names on the protest: mothers, farmers, soldiers, ministers, and asks, what nation on this earth would accept its fate signed by so few? There is no answer. And so the chamber grows quiet, not out of respect, but calculation. For every senator in that room is weighing two questions. Is this treaty legitimate? And if it isn't, do we dare to admit it?
Silence in Congress rarely means agreement. It means scheming. Behind committee doors, the senators split into factions. Some see the Cherokee petition as an inconvenience to be swatted away. Others, mostly Northerners, missionaries' allies, men who had read the petitions aloud in their own parlors, see it as a test case for the very meaning of American law. But while Congress hesitates, another branch of government has already spoken. Worcester v. Georgia, 1832. Chief Justice Marshall's words still echo through legal journals. The Cherokee Nation is a distinct community, occupying its own territory, in which the laws of Georgia can have no force. That ruling, delivered years earlier, should have been a shield of steel. Instead, President Andrew Jackson spat on it with a sneer history remembers in the form of a taunt he may or may not have spoken aloud, but certainly acted upon. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Jackson refused to uphold the ruling. The Supreme Court spoke. The president shrugged. Now John Ross drags that ghost of a ruling back into the chamber like a witness summoned from the grave. He recites passages from Marshall's opinion, citing them line by line, forcing senators to hear their own judiciary declare, in full legal clarity, that the Cherokee are not subjects, not tenants, but a sovereign nation. Some senators shift, visibly uncomfortable, others visibly irritated, but the argument has teeth. Ross presses harder. He produces other documents, treaties signed by George Washington, ratified by the Senate, sealed with wax still traceable in the archives. He names them like artillery volleys. Treaty of Holston, 1791. Treaty of Tellico, 1798. Treaty of Washington, 1819. Each one reaffirms Cherokee autonomy. Each one explicitly guarantees their land forever. Forever, a word now sounding like a joke. The Senate floor becomes a courtroom, and Ross is the prosecuting attorney. Elias Boudinot, seated behind him, offers quiet translations when needed. Though torn by guilt for the treaty his name now rests upon, he does not speak. His silence is a wound. Outside the chamber, removal agents are already stacking supplies: iron chains, canvas tents, riverboats waiting on southern docks. The machinery of eviction is not waiting for the law. It is preparing for the order. Inside, Ross makes one final move. He invokes property law. If the United States claims to honor contracts, if it claims to honor deeds and ownership, then how can it strip land from Cherokee farmers who have plows, fences, tax receipts, and in many cases, slaves, just like Southern planters? That line lands like a cannonball, because suddenly the comparison is unavoidable. If Cherokee lands can be taken, even when organized under white man's laws, then no property is safe. Not white property, not anyone's. The debate fractures. One senator whispers to another, "If we strip law from them today, who keeps it from being stripped from us tomorrow?" And so for the first time, the Cherokee cease being a question. They become a precedent. Not a tribe to be pitied, a test case to be feared. The courtroom victories echo like distant thunder. But in Cherokee country, the storm has already made landfall. Spring 1837. Red clay roads in Georgia churn beneath wagon wheels, not of Cherokee families, but of surveyors, speculators, and militiamen wearing U.S. insignia. State officials post notices on cabin doors, stamped with wax seals and written in language cold as iron. Vacate, property reassigned. Cows are branded over. Fences are pulled up. Churches emptied. Even the dead are not spared. Graveyards fenced off for redevelopment. Cherokee families watch as their orchards, apple trees planted by grandfathers, are chopped into firewood by men who do not know the names of those who planted them. But the Cherokee are not passive. They file injunctions. They send letters to Congress by the sackful, often written in both Cherokee syllabary and English script. Women like Catherine Brown organize resistance networks, hiding families, sheltering records, smuggling council letters under their skirts when soldiers approach. Inside log council houses, the nation fractures. The treaty party, the men who signed New Echota, now walk in fear of their own people. They travel with guards. They no longer sleep in the same house twice. They insist they acted for survival, but the majority call them traitors. The Cherokee National Council brands the treaty illegal, punishable by death under Cherokee law. John Ridge writes to friends in Washington, pleading for their safety. John Ross, though furious, restrains open retaliation. He warns his supporters, "We cannot begin shedding blood while claiming justice." His restraint is not forgiveness. It is strategy. He knows the U.S. government would seize on internal violence as proof that the Cherokee are unfit to govern themselves. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Senate debates the ratification of the Treaty of New Echota. The vote is razor thin, 36 to 26. One vote makes it law. One senator absent, one man sick, could have changed the fate of an entire nation. Ross, standing in the gallery as the final tally is read, goes rigid. Witnesses later recall his face, not breaking, but hardening, as if in that moment something within him sealed like tempered steel. The removal is now federal mandate, but Ross refuses to surrender. He marches straight to the War Department, demanding negotiations for delay. He buys time through sheer force of legal pressure, pushing the deadline back month after month. Every day bought is another chance. Cherokee blacksmiths forge wagon axles, not for surrender, but preparation. Schools teach both law and survival. Councils drill militia volunteers, not to attack, but to defend unarmed civilians along the routes west. They will not allow tragedy to unfold without order, because if they must leave, they will leave as a nation, not as refugees. And John Ross decides something that no one expects. If America insists on forcing them west, then the Cherokee will not crawl into exile. They will negotiate their own destiny and walk into the West as citizens, landowners, and legal equals. Summer, 1838. The sun hangs heavy over the Cherokee Nation as U.S. troops under General Winfield Scott ride in with bayonets fixed and orders signed by the President himself. Families are rounded up at gunpoint, some dragged from beds before dawn, others pulled from fields mid-plow. Children cry for dogs left behind. Pots are left boiling over dead fires. Doors swing open to empty rooms that will never be entered again. This is the moment history would later compress into two words: Trail of Tears. But before the tears came strategy. John Ross refuses to let his people be herded like cattle. He demands and secures the right for the Cherokee to conduct their own removal in organized detachments under Cherokee leadership rather than military escort. Ross himself volunteers to oversee the largest group. Picture it now. Not a ragged, panicked mob, but processions. Columns of wagons, horseback riders, marching families grouped by town and district. White canvas wagon covers ripple in the wind. Herds of cattle and horses walk alongside. Blacksmiths repair wheels at roadside forges. Elected captains take roll every morning, calling names like prayers. Adair, Bushyhead, Deer in the Water. At night, fires burn in neat rows. Hymns drift through the dark. Some in Cherokee, some in English, some in both. Soldiers escort, but do not lead, because this is not a death march. This is a nation in motion. And yet, the suffering is real. Heat waves blister skin in the summer. Autumn brings rain that turns roads into rivers of mud. The Mississippi crossing freezes over, forcing families to wait on its banks, shivering beside dying embers. Disease creeps through camps, smallpox, dysentery, pneumonia. Graves appear beside every trail, marked with stones, carved initials, sometimes nothing at all. John Ross loses his wife on the journey, Quati, who had given her blanket to a freezing child the night before. She dies on a cold dawn along the Arkansas River. Ross buries her himself, his face hidden beneath his hat. Witnesses say he never once wept where anyone could see. He could not afford the luxury of collapse. For every mile westward, Ross carries a document chest lashed to his wagon. Inside, treaties, court rulings, congressional petitions. To some, it is paper. To Ross, it is a deed to their future. Because when the Cherokee reach Indian Territory, what will one day be Oklahoma, the United States expects them broken. Instead, they arrive organized. Within months of arrival, the Cherokee National Council convenes again. Laws are reinstated, elections are held, farms are plotted, schools reopen, newspapers roll off printing presses brought across rivers and wagon beds, churches rise again from red earth. And then, the boldest move yet. Ross writes to Washington, not as a victim, not as a supplicant, but as a landowner demanding recognition of Cherokee jurisdiction over Western Territory, citing every treaty, every ruling, every inch of hard-won legality dragged across 1,000 miles of road. Congress, stunned, has no choice but to acknowledge it. The United States tried to erase a nation by moving it. Instead, that nation reassembled itself piece by legal piece on new ground.
The ink dries on yet another treaty, not one imposed in secret or signed by a minority faction, but negotiated openly by a government that refused to die. The Cherokee, having marched across a continent, now stand before Congress not as wanderers, but as political equals. Indian Territory, bleak to outsiders, becomes fertile ground in Cherokee hands. Red earth turns beneath steel plows. Irrigation ditches sparkle beneath sun and frost. Roads are graded, inns constructed, trade routes mapped and taxed. Cherokee marshals patrol boundaries. Legislators debate tariffs on salt and timber exports. Courts settle disputes over horse theft and water rights with more consistency than some American states. Missionaries who had once tried to civilize them now send letters back east marveling at Cherokee infrastructure. One northern journalist writes that the Cherokee capital at Tahlequah possesses greater order and civic refinement than many frontier towns of our own Union. But the story is not one of simple triumph. The scars remain. Burial grounds dot the land between Tennessee and Oklahoma like beads on a broken necklace. Thousands never reached the new capital. Families spend Sundays reading names carved into wood, trying to remember faces blurred by distance and time. The Cherokee carry mourning like a second spine, silent, unyielding. Yet beneath the grief there is something harder, resolve, the kind that can no longer be dislodged by bayonet or proclamation. John Ross, older now, hair silvered by frost and loss, walks through the council chambers in Tahlequah wearing the same measured calm he carried into Congress years ago. He is not naive. He knows the United States may break its word again. He knows another removal, another seizure, another incursion is always possible. But now, the Cherokee possess the one weapon that once belonged only to those in marble halls: institution. They have courts, they have schools, they have land grants secured through legal contracts, not just tradition. They have printed laws that bind just as tightly as fences. They have mastered the language of treaties, property, jurisdiction, taxation, and sovereignty, and can wield it with more precision than those who once claimed they were incapable of civilization. And across the border, other nations take notice: Choctaw, Creek, Seminole. Even tribal nations west of the Mississippi begin to send delegations to Tahlequah, asking not for aid, but for advice. The Cherokee are no longer petitioners, they are precedent. In time, Congress will try again to fracture their holdings. Agents will come with railroad charters and allotment schemes. Washington will insist once more that progress demands division. But by then, the Cherokee know the game. They have sat in the Senate chamber and out-argued senators. They have stood before the Supreme Court and won. They have crossed 1,000 miles in chains and arrived as legislators. So when the next treaty is drafted, the pens will not be held by one side alone. The United States once believed it could break a nation by uprooting it. Instead, it forged one made of law, endurance, and memory. They walked into Congress as savages. They walked out as landowners.